The rocky road to Creed 3 continues as we depart from the story of Rocky with Rocky Balboa and fast forward 9 years later to the soft reboot slash sequel slash, I guess, side story. There's many different ways to describe this film. I'm talking about 2015's Creed, which was directed by Ryan Coogler, written by him and Aaron Covington, and I believe Sylvester Stallone also had a lot to do with this story. Creed is the reboot of the franchise. Again, soft reboot, and a movie that I wasn't really sure about before I went to go see it. The funny thing about these Creed movies is that Rocky Balboa wrapped up the story pretty well, right? And at that point, it felt like anything else might actually be a detriment to the series. But what they did with Creed here is fantastic because you've got a phenomenal filmmaker in Ryan Coogler. You've got a tremendous, charismatic main character in Michael B. Jordan playing Donnie. And I watched the movie again in preparation for Creed 3, and let me tell you, it holds up and is an absolutely beautiful freaking story. Creed, in many ways, does everything that Rocky 5 tried to do, except better. Rocky Balboa, once again portrayed by Sylvester Stallone, nobody else can play him, decides to, at one point in the film, take a new trainee who he didn't really want to do this. It's one of those things where it's kind of funny how this came out a month before Force Awakens, and both films were very similar as far as them being somewhat soft reboots with the aging original star passing the torch to the young stars. And the explanation of why Luke Skywalker didn't have a Jedi Academy, to me, left a lot of people pretty unhappy, right? The reason as to why Rocky doesn't have a bunch of trainees is because of what happened in Rocky 5 with Tommy Gunn. But now we have the son of Apollo, the bastard son in many ways, coming to Rocky, and Rocky, of course, turning to and eventually saying, okay, let's try it again. Leading Creed to battle it out one on one with who at the time in the film was the light heavyweight champion of the world, because in this movie, Michael B. Jordan actually looks human, unlike in the next movie where he looks like a complete comic book freak. I'm talking about Pretty Ricky Conlan, played by Tony Bellew, who's a legitimate boxer. As the films continue to actually showcase boxers as opposed to having actors, really until Creed 3, we've got real boxers in the movie, and that does add a shred of credibility. I think Pretty Ricky Conlan, I love what they did with this, showing the HBO specials, the countdown specials, is how they introduce him, the press conference, everything had that same trace of realism from Rocky Balboa. This movie, Creed, the reason why it works, y'all, is not just because of the directing and the acting and the story. All of those things is what makes a classic film. And I do think that Creed is a modern classic. I think it also works because it takes the best parts of the other films. There's aspects of Rocky 1 in this film. There's aspects of Rocky 2. There's discussions about the Apollo Rocky fight at the end of Rocky 3. There's, obviously Rocky 4 is the death of Apollo, which would obviously, if Apollo did not die, this movie would have a total different story. So bits and pieces of every movie, and this is why it's so brilliant. Think about this. Bits and pieces, aspects of each film lead into Creed, with of course Rocky 5 being, Rocky trying to take a trainee but ultimately failing and, not wanting that to happen again, focusing on his family. And of course, Rocky 6, Balboa, with finally him getting that, as he called it, that beast out of his stomach. This movie takes elements from all the Rocky films and does them right. There's shades of Rocky 1 with Donnie trying to make a name for himself, learning more about the boxing game, trying and failing. There's a scene in the film where he goes up against a boxer played by Andre Ward, Danny Stuntman Wheeler, and phenomenal. Just Andre Ward's one of my favorite fighters, and having him in this movie and actually playing a pretty good role, he was a good actor, was very, very cool. I love the all the realism. Michael Buffer's in this. You've got like the HBO people like Max Kellerman, Jim Lampley. It's just very, very accurate. But this movie is just phenomenal. At the time of release, this was the longest Rocky film, coming in at 133 minutes, but that's because there's a lot of story. They have to introduce Donnie. They have to obviously introduce, in this film, Bianca with the hearing impairment, who is played wonderfully by Tessa Thompson. I love that with the character of Bianca, they didn't just seek to create a new Adrian, to give Donnie his own Adrian. That's not what they did. Instead, what they did was they gave him a love interest, but also one that had an issue, which is her disability with her hearing, and that's an extra layer, an extra challenge that Donnie has to overcome. And it's interesting because people in Donnie's life all have issues throughout this film, and these issues weigh heavily on Donnie, but he is an underdog who has to overcome. He is Rocky Balboa in the first film, but he has the blood, the literal blood of Apollo Creed. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story. I mean, there's so many things that this movie did right. Ryan Coogler, prior to this film, directed a wonderful film called Fruitvale Station that I watched on Netflix many years ago. And that film is damn near heartbreaking. And it's a true story, too. It's based on a true story. And that might be the first time that Coogler and Michael B. Jordan worked together, but of course, since then they went on to do Creed and later Black Panther and Black Panther 2. To me, in my opinion, so far, as much as I appreciate all of Coogler's body of work so far, he's a great filmmaker and he's made a lot of great movies. This to me is my favorite movie he's put out. I think this is the best film. And that's saying something considering how much Black Panther and Black Panther 2, Wakanda Forever, are so beloved. This right here, to me, in my opinion, is peak Ryan Coogler. Taking aspects of Rocky, modernizing them, doing things like popping up the graphics, showing you the win-loss record before a fight. The awesome scene in the middle of the film that is, it looks like it's shot in one take, where the camera is panning around the fighters. There's so much incredible camera work done here. And it's not like I ever had a problem with Stallone's directing, because I thought he did a phenomenal job directing Rocky 2, Rocky 3, etc. And he's great at directing these boxing fights. But Ryan Coogler brought a fresh set of eyeballs, a new coat of paint to the Rocky series by having different kinds of camera angles, by having it be a bit more authentic in the streets and the slums of Philadelphia, by having a more urban cast. There's things this movie does so well. Michael B. Jordan is a very likable actor, and he plays a very, very likable Adonis Creed. And my God, when I remember the first time I saw this movie, I saw it in theaters the weekend it came out. It may have actually been on Thanksgiving. I think it was in Thanksgiving. I was with my girl at the time up north. Up in Massachusetts, and me and her and a couple of her brothers went to go see this movie. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I cried 3 times. I'm not even gonna front. I cried 3 times during this movie, and I'm gonna assume you've already seen this movie. I'm gonna assume that if you haven't, you really should see all the Rocky films before going to see Rocky 3. I'm sorry, Creed 3. So the scene where Rocky is, diagnosed with cancer, I couldn't help but I was bawling, because seeing this movie for the very first time, I was so scared that they were going to kill off Rocky. And the reason why is because if you remember, in one of the original drafts for Rocky 5, Rocky's supposed to die in that movie. So I was thinking, okay, are they actually going to do it? Is Stallone going to die? And he didn't. But man, they really had me. They really had me. And that whole you fight, I fight, like they both had to fight, beautiful. Just this movie is as much about Rocky as it's about Adonis Creed. That's why it works. That's why I'm worried about Creed 3, because Rocky's not in it. And you gotta have him there because he's sort of like Mick, except in some ways stronger. And his arc in Rocky 2, there's a character arc from Balboa to Creed 1 and Creed 2. I'm sorry, I meant to say Creed 2. There's a character arc with Rocky and his son that ends in Creed 2, that's just a beautiful piece of the story. Just phenomenal. We'll talk more about that in the review for Creed 2. But I wanted to say, or the re review, what I wanted to say though is there's so much development for Rocky. Rocky has to test the waters with a new student. Can he train this kid right? Rocky has to teach him how to be tough, how to survive, how to overcome. Rocky has to deal with his own cancer. It's just a phenomenal story, and they really, both the characters have to overcome. So I cried then. Second time I cried is when Rocky tells Donnie that he wishes he could take everything good in the world, everything that's good and pure, and trade it all for one day with his wife again. That killed me. That slayed me because, as you know, Adrian is my second favorite character in this franchise behind Apollo Creed. And, she was just the centerpiece, the emotional core of Rocky 2 and 3. A little bit in 1, but really in 2 and 3. She was the motivation for Rocky. So that line, that one line says everything you need to know about how much he loved Adrian. Just so heartbreaking that this guy's alone. And then the third time I cried was at the very end during the fight, the main event fight with Adonis and Pretty Ricky Conlan, when basically in the last round, you know, Rocky, I mean, dude, Sylvester Stallone was going for like a best supporting actor. These guys were going for awards because some have said that this movie is Stallone's best acting of the entire franchise, and honest to God, I can't argue with that. I can't. I mean, he's always great as Rocky, but I mean, this movie, it's powerful. It is a powerful, powerful film. So, what I wanted to say was, you know, the third time was when he tells Donnie, that he loves him and that, you're helping me fight even more than Apollo helped me in Rocky 3, which is my actual favorite movie in the franchise. And he gets up and the horns start dun, 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 and I was like, oh my God, here we go. This is a Rocky movie. Because prior to this, the film borrowed elements from Rocky, and they had a little bit of the soundtrack of Rocky, a little bit of the leitmotif in the background, just softly playing. But when we get to that big climax and we hear those notes and we hear going the distance, dun, 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 it's like a remix. Perfect. Just absolutely perfect. Obviously, Adonis Creed has his own sort of music, his own theme that you hear over and over again in the film, his own leitmotif. But them putting the Rocky one back in for the very end, Ryan Coogler knew exactly what he was doing. This is how you do a nostalgia movie right. There's things in this film that are obvious member berries, Mickey's Gym, little things here and there, locations in Philly, even like small things like Adrian's restaurant, which was only featured in Rocky 6, Rocky Balboa. There's tons of them, but there's not so many to where the movie relies on it. You just know you're in that world because it's in Philadelphia and it's beautifully shot. I mean, even the scene where Adonis is running in Philadelphia looks like the one where Rocky was running in Rocky 2. Like that was the whole point. That was the whole point. And it's done so well. I compare this film to Force Awakens, perhaps unfairly, because they were both trying to do the same thing. And I think somewhat succeeded, I would say. Somewhat. I wouldn't say fully. I think Creed did it better. And then Last Jedi, screwed everything up for me. But with this movie, nothing was screwed up. And at the end of the day, even though Pretty Ricky was a guy who still won the fight, he was knocked down for the very first time and almost lost in the final round. And that was enough for a moral victory for Adonis to prove that he's not a mistake. There's so many issues in this movie dealing with adoption, which I can relate to. I can relate to the thing with Rocky getting cancer because my mom died of cancer. Like, the movie hits me right in the heart. And the more you've lived life and the more you've experienced tragedy in your life, the harder it hits you. But it also encourages you to fight on. Creed in the past has been labeled the best Rocky film. And even though I think Rocky 3 is my favorite and Rocky 1 is a very special movie, I can completely understand why people think that Creed is the best film. Because the script, this was a brilliant script. They could have screwed this up 100 different times, y'all, and they didn't do it. They got it right. They got it right. So major props to Ryan Coogler, major props to Aaron Covington and Sylvester Stallone. His story was told. It didn't feel, it didn't feel forced in any way. It felt like a logical continuation, and the characters of Rocky and Adonis, their relationship is beautiful, and it's a real tragedy that Rocky's not in Creed 3, and I really hope that he comes back for Creed 4 because I know that Stallone's pissed at the studio, but man, that relationship really is super important to this franchise, especially in this film. So if you haven't seen Creed in a long time, go see it. It's just brilliant. It is. This could have been the last Rocky movie. This could have been Rocky 7, Creed, and I would have been happy. This would have been a great, like Balboa was a great ending. This right here, the way this ended, yes, it starts up a new story, but man, like they could have ended it here and I would have been a happy camper. Next time we're going to be talking about Rocky 8, aka Creed 2, if you want to call it Rocky 8, a movie that I was skeptical of until I saw it. So stay tuned for that. Take care, and I'll see y'all in that one.